My name is Grace. I still remember the way Tyler's face twisted when I told him, I already sold it. The $3.5 million penthouse he thought was his forever wedding gift, paid for by me, was no longer his. He stood there in his designer tuxedo, rattling the locked door and shouting, "What the hell?" while I watched from the edge of the driveway, calm and steady, holding power he had always assumed was his. The keypad flashed red. "You don't need to break the glass, Tyler," I said quietly. "It's over. Karma doesn't scream. It clicks." The betrayal hadn't started with a fight. It started with a ping. 11 p.m. the night before the wedding. The hour when everything is supposed to be still. I was in my San Francisco office, city lights blurred by fog outside the windows, finishing a strategy report for an artificial intelligence startup. My phone lit up with a single text from my mother. I expected a last-minute rehearsal detail. Instead, I got this. "Grace, we've all discussed it. Your presence at the ceremony tomorrow would ruin the aesthetic of Tyler's high society event. We told Jasmine's family we come from old money. Your self-made struggle reminds everyone of the truth we left behind. Please stay home." Clinical. Precise. Designed to wound. I didn't cry. I didn't call. In my line of work, you don't panic when you find a flaw in the system. You patch it. I stared at the message until the glow burned into my vision and a truth settled in. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a silent investor in their fantasy. A subscription they renewed whenever the bill was too high. On my desk sat a leather-bound folder. Inside was the deed to a luxury penthouse overlooking the bay, $3.5 million, paid in full as Tyler's wedding gift. My last attempt to buy belonging. At the bottom of the transfer paperwork was an unsigned line. Tyler, arrogant and careless, had never returned the final signed documents I sent weeks earlier. He assumed my support was permanent. Legally, the property was still mine. Every wall of glass. Every slab of marble. Every view of the water. I waited for regret. None came. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a balance sheet. And they had just plunged into a moral deficit they could never repay. My compassion had been a luxury. They'd been overdrafting for years. At 11:07 p.m., I called my real estate agent's private number. She answered half asleep. "Activate the emergency sale clause," I said. "The backup all-cash buyer? Tell them it's theirs." The buyer had already cleared title and signed a contingency-free agreement the previous week. All that remained was my authorization to release the funds from escrow. "I want the locks changed and the funds transferred," I added. "By morning." When I hung up, the office felt impossibly quiet. The low hum of the server rack vibrated through the floor. For a moment, I wasn't a 32-year-old consultant at the top of her field. I was 12 again. Standing in a cramped kitchen in Atlanta that smelled like old grease and humid air. The screen door whining on rusty hinges. My father, Gary, hunched over the table with a newspaper spread wide, checking scores like the numbers mattered more than anything else in the room. That sound, the hinge scraping metal, had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Tyler leaned back in his chair like he already owned a kingdom he had never lifted a finger to build. I can still see the exact moment Gary reached into his wallet. He pulled out a crisp $50 bill and slid it across the linoleum toward him. "Here," he said, his voice soft in a way it never was with me. "Go catch a movie with your friends. You've been working hard at practice." Tyler hadn't been working hard. He was barely passing his classes and had perfected the art of making me do his chores. But Gary didn't see that. He saw the son he preferred to believe in. I stepped forward, heart pounding. I had been carrying a folded list in my pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. "Dad," I said quietly, "I need $38 for my science and history textbooks. The school says I can't stay in the advanced track if I don't have them by Monday." The warmth vanished from his face. He didn't even glance at the paper in my hand. "Textbooks," he snapped. "Grace, you're always asking for something. Do you think I'm made of money? Learn to be more like your brother. He doesn't nag me over every little thing." I stood there staring at the $50 Tyler was already folding into his pocket. He gave me a slow smirk. The kind that said he understood the rules of this house better than anyone and had no intention of breaking them. That was how it worked in our family. Tyler's wants were treated like emergencies. My needs were treated like accusations. No one ever announced it outright, but the hierarchy was clear. One child was the investment, the other was expendable. By making the unfairness feel ordinary, they trained me to keep striving for approval that was never coming. Gary didn't think he was being cruel. In his mind, he was rewarding potential and teaching me discipline. What he really taught me was that my worth, in his eyes, was negotiable, sometimes even non-existent. I was the spare part, expected to be capable enough to survive on my own, but quiet enough not to complain about being handed no tools. I left the kitchen without the money for my books. I didn't cry. In our house, tears were labeled drama, and drama was used as evidence against you. That was the day I understood something clearly. If I wanted a seat at the table, I would have to build the table myself. After that, I never asked Gary for another cent. I got a job at a rundown diner on the edge of town. My evenings were spent behind a counter that smelled like old grease and harsh disinfectant. My hands stayed raw from the steam of the dishwasher and the heat of the fryers. While Tyler burned through the cash Gary handed him like pocket change, I counted tips and spare coins, building a college fund that my parents had already declared was entirely my responsibility. I've come to think of it as the survivor's invisible chain. When you grow up as the spare part, self-sufficiency stops being a virtue and becomes an obsession. You don't just work to live, you work to justify your existence. People see what I've built now and call it ambition. They admire the drive, the discipline, the strategy. What they don't see is where it began. It wasn't born from confidence. It was born from invisibility, from the belief that if I could climb high enough, achieve enough, become undeniable enough, someone might finally look at me and see value. Back then, I wasn't dreaming of success. I was just trying to escape. I planned my escape the way I did everything back then, methodically, one double shift at a time. Eventually, I made it to San Francisco. I climbed fast, building a name for myself as an artificial intelligence strategy consultant. By 25, I was earning six figures and advising companies on how to predict the future. What I never predicted was how tightly the past still held me. That's why I bought the Penthouse. $3.5 million of skyline and glass wasn't generosity. It was desperation dressed up as success. I told myself I was helping Tyler start fresh, giving Gary and Monica something to brag about, finally becoming the daughter who saved the family instead of competing with it. I thought if I handed them the keys to a multimillion-dollar view, I could rewrite 22 years of being second choice. I was an expert in systems and algorithms. But I overlooked a basic truth. You can't purchase loyalty from people who never valued you to begin with. The Penthouse was the highest rung on my ladder. And when I reached the top, they didn't pull me up. They kicked the ladder away. I was told not to attend the wedding because my presence would disrupt the aesthetic of their new high society circle. That was when something inside me finally broke free. I wasn't their investment. I was their revenue stream. The day before the wedding, I wasn't picking out jewelry for a ceremony I was banned from. I was watching the market and Tyler. He posted a glossy carousel of professionally staged photos. Front and center, the terrace view from the Penthouse, him and Jasmine clinking champagne glasses against a $3.5 million sunset. The caption read like a press release from an alternate reality. Finally moving into our forever home. Self-made. Hard work pays off. I stared at the screen with a detached, almost clinical amusement. It was like reviewing a model built on corrupted data. He had spent decades letting me absorb the cost of his failures, and now he was branding my capital as his character. 2 days after the midnight text that uninvited me from the wedding, I sat across from Julia in her office. We had been friends since freshman year. Now she was a family law attorney known for being precise and merciless when necessary. She slid a thick gray folder across her desk. We were preparing leverage in case Tyler tried to contest the Penthouse sale, she said evenly. But I found something better. I opened the file. Digital forensics. Bank records. Property documents. Julia tapped a page dated 3 years earlier. It was the deed to the 10-acre plot in Georgia my grandmother had left to me in her will. That land was the only inheritance I ever truly cared about. Ancient oaks. A small pond. The one place I used to hide from Tyler's bullying and my parents' indifference. Except it wasn't mine anymore. It had been sold 36 months ago to a developer for $180,000. My name was on the signature line, Grace Henderson, curving upward in a convincing imitation of my handwriting. But I could see it instantly. The pressure was wrong. The stroke too rushed. It was the handwriting of someone who had never learned to wait. He forged your identity, Julia said. He used a dormant bank account you hadn't checked in years. The full $180,000 was gone within 48 hours. High-stakes casino in Las Vegas. I leaned back and felt something unexpected. Not grief. Not rage. Clarity. This wasn't just entitlement. It was predation. Tyler hadn't just taken advantage of me. He had stolen the only piece of my childhood that ever felt safe. And I knew with a calm certainty that Gary and Monica must have known. They had always smoothed over his disasters, called them phases, growing pains. Meanwhile, my achievements were treated as distractions from what really mattered. Him. File the criminal complaint, I told Julia. Include the forgery in the final legal notice. I want it waiting for them at the Penthouse tonight. I didn't want an apology. Apologies are negotiable. Police reports are not. That evening, the sky was the color of old bruises, deep purple fading into gold. The Penthouse towered above the street, gleaming and empty. Tyler reached the door first. He punched in the code. Sharp beep. Red error. He tried again. Faster. Harder. The same flat denial. He rattled the handle. Then he shoved his shoulder against it as if force could override ownership. That's when I stepped forward. Fully. Deliberately. My heels echoed against the stone as I moved into the wash of streetlight. Tyler turned, his expression collapsing. Grace? What the hell are you doing here? Why won't the door open? I met his eyes. I already sold it. The escrow closed on Friday. The wire hit my account an hour ago. The new owners take possession on Monday. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing outside a locked door. Tyler stared at me as if I'd switched to a language he didn't recognize. Sold it, he said. You can't sell our house. It was our wedding gift. Jasmine's gaze moved between us, confusion tightening her expression. Tyler, you told me she refused to come because she was jealous. You said the deed was already in your name. I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence stretch, long enough for doubt to settle where certainty had been. Color climbed up Tyler's neck. He launched into a speech about loyalty, about family, about betrayal. But all I could see was the fragility underneath it. He had spent 30 years confusing access with ownership. Gary and Monica had treated my money like it was proof of his merit. He had built an identity on resources he never earned, mistaking my generosity for his authority. Now the funding was gone. And so was the illusion. You want to talk about family? I said calmly. Let's talk about the $180,000 you stole when you forged my signature and sold Grandma's land in Georgia. The air went still. Tyler froze when he saw the envelope in my hand. He looked at it like it might explode. Jasmine reached for it before he could stop her. She scanned the documents: property transfer, handwriting analysis, bank records tracing the money to a Las Vegas casino. I watched her face change in real time. Confusion. Disbelief. Recognition. She looked up at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. You're a thief, she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of it. You told me your sister was dramatic. But you're the criminal. You built our life on something you stole from her. Tyler made one last attempt. Baby, I was protecting you. I was going to pay her back once the business took off. The business you haven't worked on in 6 months, I added evenly. Jasmine didn't wait for another excuse. She slipped the engagement ring off her finger, the one likely bought with money from my stolen inheritance, and dropped it onto the stone porch. It hit with a small metallic ping and rolled until it stopped near my shoe. She didn't look at Tyler again. She turned and walked toward the elevator, her white dress trailing through the dust of a home that had never belonged to either of them. Tyler didn't follow. He collapsed onto the top step, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time, the outside matched the truth. No penthouse, no narrative, no borrowed prestige. Just a man in an expensive suit he couldn't afford to maintain. Zero. I stood there for a moment, holding the leverage he had always assumed was his by right. I searched myself for pity. There was none. Goodbye, Tyler, I said, stepping past him. I hope the aesthetic was worth it. The $3.5 million cleared into my account that Tuesday afternoon. Just a string of numbers on a screen. But to me it marked the end of something far older than a real estate deal. For 32 years, I had been the silent investor in my family's vanity project. The reliable one. The resource. The safety net. As the balance updated, I felt the final strand of that invisible chain snap. The aftermath was swift and clinical. Tyler was charged with felony identity theft and grand larceny. Without the Penthouse or Jasmine, there was nowhere left to perform success. By the end of the week, she had filed for an annulment, unwilling to stay married to a man who had built his throne out of stolen memories. And for the first time in my life, the cost of his choices was finally his own. Gary and Monica didn't walk away untouched. The same San Francisco circles they had worked so carefully to impress went quiet once the police report became public record. Invitations stopped. Calls weren't returned. Reputation, I learned, evaporates faster than money. They called me 16 times in 3 days. The voicemails evolved in predictable stages. First outrage, then lectures about loyalty, then soft, trembling requests for a temporary family loan. I didn't return a single call. Instead, I redirected the money. The $3.5 million became the seed for the Legacy Foundation, a scholarship and support fund for students who are working double shifts, scraping together textbook money, and shrinking their dreams because someone convinced them they were a backup plan instead of a future. A month after the sale, I met Jasmine at a small waterfront cafe. The tension that had once defined her posture was gone. She told me she'd enrolled in a master's program, funded in part by the $50,000 wedding gift from my business partner, money she reclaimed as her starting over fund. We clinked coffee mugs. Not to family. To clarity. To chosen kinship. To the rare and powerful bond between people who see each other clearly when there's nothing to gain. I've realized something since then. The most dangerous prison has no bars. It's the one where you wait for permission from people who will never grant it. I spent decades trying to purchase a seat at a table that was never meant for me. What I didn't understand then is that the only seat that truly mattered was the one I could build myself. If you are the one sitting on the edge of the room feeling like the spare part in your own family's machinery, hear this. Reclaiming your worth is not cruelty. It is survival. You are not a phase. You are not a burden. You do not owe your life to people who see you as an account to withdraw from. Forgiveness is often framed as something you give to others. But sometimes the deepest healing comes from forgiving yourself, forever believing there's smaller version of you. A boundary is not a wall meant to punish. It's a line that defines where you end and someone else's dysfunction begins. You have the right to take up space. You have the right to shine without asking permission. Today my table is full. Not with people bound to me by blood, but by respect, honesty, and mutual choice. I've learned that the most powerful response to dismissal isn't destruction. It's construction. Build a life so full, so purposeful, that their early rejection becomes irrelevant background noise. I told the truth. I closed the door. And for the first time in my life I am home. The best revenge isn't making them pay. It's no longer needing them at all.